Good evening, everybody. This is Joe Joseph, and welcome aboard for the Tuesday edition of Freedomlink Radio. Tonight, we're joined by former IRS Special Agent Joe Banister. He's also the host of Freedom Above Fortune Radio on the Liberty Works Radio Network that airs every Saturday morning from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., and that's Eastern Time. And it's great to have him aboard because let me tell you something, folks. Nothing like having somebody that's had an awakening of sorts, come out, do a bunch of research, I mean years of research into the income tax, present it to his superiors, and then come to find out they don't care about the truth after all. So without further ado, Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much for having me.
And Gwen, glad to have you here as well, as usual, as always.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome, Jim.
So Joe, first of all, I guess if you can, give the listeners a brief overview of who you are and kind of what you went through.
I'd be glad to, and thank you. It's kind of weird when I talk about this now. It's back in the other century, so it makes me feel kind of old. But
yeah.
I'm sure you guys aren't in your teens or 20s, so you probably feel the same way. Everything I'm describing happened in the last century. But
yeah, I was actually in the military when you went through all this. So
okay. Well, anyway, graduated from San Jose State University back in 1986 with an accounting degree, and then I spent a number of years in the public accounting arena, KPMG and Arthur Andersen and Touche Ross and all these huge multinational accounting firms, and they keep on merging until there's probably going to be only one left.
I'm sure.
But at the time, they called it the Big Eight. And it was quite a plum job to be able to get on your resume. And so I worked at KPMG. It was called Pete Marwick back then, Pete Marwick Mitchell. Mm-hmm. And did that right out of college, and then became a controller for a venture capital firm in Menlo Park, California. And as I was hitting my stride, shall we say, having gotten out of school and getting into my accounting and finance career, I looked at what I was doing and what my bosses were doing, and I thought to myself, there's no way that I can stand to do this kind of work for another 30 or 40 years. And, I was in my mid to late 20s, married, one child, and then another one on the way. Mm-hmm. And I thought, maybe I better kind of make a break for it now, because if I wait too long, I might be stuck. And also, there were a lot of family and friends, people that I knew who were in law enforcement. And one in particular was an IRS special agent. He was a special agent, a criminal investigator in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. So he turned me on to the fact that there were many what the Freedom Movement calls alphabet soup agencies. Three or four more letter acronyms.
That's right.
And so I was kind of thinking, well, I've got a number of friends and relatives who are in uniformed law enforcement, local cops and state troopers and that kind of thing. But, with this degree in accounting and, having this financial expertise, maybe I'd be better off being an investigator than, a uniformed police officer. And so this friend who worked for the IRS said, yeah, that would be the best decision for you, Joe. And he suggested that I apply to the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. So it was about 1991, 1992 when I applied to the FBI and the IRS. And the FBI acted upon my application very fast. Within a few weeks, if that, the FBI called me to the San Francisco office and asked me to come to take a battery of written exams. And they don't really tell you how you do on each level, but they say if you reach the following level, then you pass the previous level. So I kept on progressing up through the written exams, the panel interviews, the physical battery of, running 2 miles and doing 50 pull-ups and push-ups and all kinds of stuff. But I basically passed through all this gauntlet of evaluation, and then all of a sudden there was a hiring freeze because just like recently, back there in the early 90s, there was a big budget debacle when I believe it was Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House, and
right.
So due to this budget crisis and a hiring freeze, the FBI wanted to hire me. I mean, that's at least what the people in San Francisco were saying. I was ready to be given a letter that said, report to Quantico, Virginia. And because of this hiring freeze, they couldn't do it. They had no legal authority to write that letter. So I ended up in a very long holding pattern that started with this hiring freeze. And it lasted a couple of years, like 1991, 1992, 1993. And just about the time I was getting I'd probably wait another 10 years, but my family was like, Joe, you got your life on hold. This FBI dream you have isn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then meanwhile, the IRS called just about at the time I was ready to throw in the towel. And it was the San Francisco office of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the IRS CID, that acronym, CID. They have about 3,000 special agent criminal investigators in the IRS CID around the country. And for your listeners, some may not know that a GS 1811 is the designation. So an FBI special agent is a GS 1811. An IRS special agent is a GS 1811. So there's some minimum criteria that you have to fulfill in terms of criminal investigator training and firearms use and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I learned that the IRS, basically had a similar position. In fact, in the exact same position. It's just that their jurisdiction would cover a different area of federal law. So even though I had my heart set on the FBI, I couldn't get hired. But meanwhile, for some odd reason, the IRS wasn't under any hiring freeze. Because at that time, at least the FBI was under the Department of Justice. I think now they're under the Department of Homeland Security, and probably soon everyone will be. But the IRS was still under the Treasury and still is today. So the IRS had hiring authority. They came out, asked me if I wanted a job, and I interviewed in August of 1993. And by November of 1993, I was being sworn in as an IRS special agent. And by sworn in, I mean, sworn oath to support and defend the Constitution. And it was kind of a unique swearing-in ceremony because normally they'll have 10, 20, 30 IRS employees all at once, raise your right hand, and it's just a perfunctory thing. But I was by myself. My family was there. I've got the home video, and do it in front of the flag and the whole bit. So it was really meaningful. And, of course, from that day forward, I was very dedicated to adhering to that oath, especially because, you take it before God, and I'm not about to, start lying to God. So I really felt strongly about abiding by that oath. So November of 1993 is when I started, and about 3 years into the job, it was December of 1996, a little over 3 years, and I was listening to a talk radio show, and the guest was talking about the federal income tax. And the guest's name was D.V. Kidd. She's got an unusual first name, D.V., it's D-E-V-V-Y, and last name Kidd, K-I-D-D. And D.V.'s still around, quite the activist. But anyway, that day in 1996, she was talking about the federal income tax and the monetary system. And she was talking about things that were, I can hear the bumper music.
Yeah, you sure can. Hold on. When we come back, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of what Joe found out in his research with the IRS. Stay tuned. You're listening to Freedomlink Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Don't go away. Welcome back to Freedomlink Radio, folks. Our guest tonight is Joe Banister. I'm Joe Joseph, my co-host Gwen Caldwell. The website, thefreedomlinkradio.com, and you can email us at thefreedomlink@centurylink.net. So, Joe, we are at 1996, and this is right about the time that you kind of saw the writing on the wall, and you listened to that show. And what did it do to you? What did it inspire you to go further and try and investigate the validity of what you heard?
It did, and mainly because that show, and I was a pretty avid talk radio listener, and our government cars, which we were each assigned a government car, we'd take home at night and basically live in it because investigators are driving all over creation. So, I would have the radio on. And so I listened to this host, Jeff Metcalf, for the prior 2 years. And what I liked about him is that he wasn't a partisan kind of guy. He was just about what's right or wrong, and
right.
What's constitutional and what's unconstitutional, and when's the government breaking the law, and things like that. So he'd already built a very high level of credibility with me for truth. And yet then he has this lady on the show, DV Kidd, and she's talking about something that's very near and dear to my heart, or at least near and dear to my whole professional existence, and that is the federal income tax. Because by that time, I had already earned my certified public accountant certificate. The IRS had hired me back in November of 1993. And so I was really hitting my stride about 3 years into this career as an IRS criminal investigator. And then here's this lady talking about the income tax being illegitimately enforced, illegally enforced and administered beyond what the laws passed by Congress actually allowed the IRS to do. And then she would also rope in conversations about the Federal Reserve and the monetary system and the New World Order and, all these different things that through my training and really just being the average American also thought, oh, that's one of those conspiracy gals, But again, because of that credibility of the talk show host, that's what kind of kept my ears peeled and at least think, well, I'm going to keep an open mind here. That lady sounds pretty kooky, but the talk show host, Jeff Metcalf, never did. And so why would he have a kooky lady on his show? Why would he destroy his reputation by having somebody that wasn't telling the truth? But if she's telling the truth, what does that say about what I do for a living? So
right.
I had to resolve that dichotomy there. And that's basically what I did. She invited the listeners to order some of her booklets, and she was only asking $1 a piece, I think, so she wasn't out to make any money off of it. So those booklets arrived in January of 1997, about a month or less after I heard her on the radio. And that set me off on this basically about a 2-year off-duty, evenings, weekends, every waking moment outside of work to try to validate or invalidate these claims that DV Kidd made about the income tax. That basically, there were laws that were passed by Congress, and that presented a circle of authority, but then the IRS would go way beyond that circle in enforcing and administering the income tax. And since my job, was basically an enforcer, an investigator who was going to try to at least get a jury to believe these people were guilty and put them in prison, I thought that I had a really, quite the duty to to learn whether this was true or not. And of course, if I found out that she was lying, well, then I would have, yelled that from the rooftops.
Right.
I didn't really consider what I would do if she was telling the truth. So, but I had a couple of years to, to meditate on that while I was gathering evidence. And I basically was doing my own personal investigation. I didn't ask the IRS for any kind of permission. Because everything I was gathering was basically public information. I did make some trips to the IRS law library, which really just enabled me to have